We're back with The Line. This week, our panelists are talking about the priorities of Governor Susana Martinez that she outlined in her State of the State address. The governor highlighted growth at the border port of Santa Teresa. She also pitched the idea of a closing fund to entice businesses to relocate here to New Mexico.
Recently, the executives of a major national company told me, quote, "We have never even considered New Mexico when deciding where to expand. Always looked right past your state. Then someone told us we wouldn't believe what's happening there and that we should take a second look. So we did. And we couldn't believe what we found." My friends, the word is getting out, but there are several things that we can do to turn up the volume. That's why I'm proposing a $50 million closing fund for economic development projects right here in New Mexico. We should also provide specific incentives to attract companies to move their headquarters to New Mexico.
Rob, this proposal has some support from both sides of the aisle. This idea of a $50 million closing fund, not unprecedented. You've had some experience in seeing this in other states as well?
Yeah, Texas has one of about $200 million. I imagine that it'll probably get through because you've got some bipartisan support for this. Some fiscal conservatives might get some heartburn about this, and I imagine some people on the far left would probably not like it too, thinking, well, we're enticing businesses to come here. Why are taxpayers spending $50 million to help seal the deal? But I think it's going to pass.
Sophie, you know, nobody knows yet with any detail how this fund is supposed to work, how it gets administered, who wins, who loses. Is there a cap on it? Do you get it at, I don't know, $4 million at a time?
Like per company, or
exactly.
are we going to be sort of spending 50?
I can think of about 150 different things here. You know, how much detail do we really need about this?
I think we need some.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to have some sense of it. And I, you know, let me just point out that this is the governor that instituted caps in the film and television industry, who really has kind of placed a priority on some kind of accountability, although it would be nice to have reporting following that, but for another day. I would expect that we would see, even with the enthusiasm from both sides of the aisle, I would expect that we would see some hashing out of the details, because ultimately the governor's office is going to administer it. And so I don't think the Democrats are just going to say, yeah, let's write you a $50,000 check. Good going. Let's see what we do with it.
Exactly right. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, the devil's always in the details. I think that, you know, in my time in the legislature, there was never a bill that appropriated $50 million just because.
Right.
So, I mean, there'll be some language on kind of outlining it. I think that's where the fight will boil down to. I think the governor's going to say, give it to me with, you know, kind of the outline of where the boundaries are, and let me draw everything inside of it. And I think you're going to find the legislature, at least, I think you may find, Rob's right and everybody's right, some conservatives saying, no, we got to put a plan in place for governors other than you. And you're going to find some on the left saying, you know, we want to make sure that you're doing the right things with the money. So I think there could be a battle line drawn on how this comes out. But, you know, we've got that JTIP program. We've got, we got more money in these funds that are going out to do things that I would like to see them say, before we take $50 million out of the permanent fund to do this, why don't we go get all of the money we're doing all these programs and see if they're even working, and then use the money accordingly. Because I believe there's money in programs out there that are going to the same 3 or 4 companies every single year, and it's millions of dollars, and that stuff should stop.
You wouldn't be alone on that. A lot of, Rob mentioned the $200 million for Texas. They have one of these funds. I'm wondering if the idea here is just to hang out the shingle that you even just have a closing fund and see who shows up. Do you know what I mean? It's not necessarily how it works after the fact. Let's see who makes an inquiry once they know there's money. Now, that said, does that not beg, I don't know, nefarious people, other types of folks? Whenever there's money to be had, everybody sort of shows up. You know what I'm getting at here?
I can't believe there's gambling in this system.
Right, exactly.
Well, you're sort of saying that it's symbolic, but you know, it might have a lot of merit. I mean, you know, people knock on the door. You got to open the door, see if they're. You can always close it.
And does this not ring of somewhat of Governor Richardson, however, in some ways, where wasn't there some angst about?
Oh, you're going to be in trouble making that.
Well, you know where I'm going here, though. That, you know,
he
he could shake the money tree. He could go out and make deals. He was very, very good at that, at economic development. And sometimes you got to use a dollar to make a dollar. You know what I mean? Some people had trouble with that with Governor Richardson. Should the same thing apply here with Governor Martinez?
You know, I think that, the reason that you have a governor or an executive in general is because they can bring that direction and focus that you can't do with the legislature. So you've got to give a lot of ability to whoever's in office, whether they're Republican or Democrat, to actually accomplish things.
Right.
And so I think leaving it more open is a better way of doing it.
One of the interesting things to see what they're going to do with the fund quickly is, is it going to be $50 million a year that has to be spent every year? Or is it going to be $50 million a year that they can go invest and build a fund out of, that they can say, hey, we've done some investments with this money over the course of 5 years. We've turned, 100 and 250 million into $500 million, and now we're able to use that money.
One thing I'll say about this is listening to the speech and rereading it later, one thing that really struck me is we're this far into this administration, into the second term, and I'm finally hearing things that economists have been saying since the economy went bad. We have to invest in infrastructure. We have to put money into building businesses here. Not so much, I gotta say, there's not so much consensus on right to work legislation and some of the tax cut things that the governor's proposing, but some of what she's putting out there now is kind of, I hate to say it, folks, the Democratic Party line from the last 5-6 years. Investment in the state and spending by the state. So, I'm encouraged to see the governor asking for that kind of money. And my hope is that she doesn't just sock it away, that it does get spent within the state in order to bolster our economy.
Interestingly, Sophie just mentioned right-to-work legislation. It is expected to get some significant debate this year in Santa Fe. Governor Martinez supports it.
If a worker wants to join a union, then they will. But it is fundamentally wrong to require membership or take money from the paychecks of our workers in order to get a job. For these workers, this is gas money, rent, or a car payment. And studies have shown that states where workers are allowed to make this choice for themselves have higher employment levels, and companies locate there more often because of this policy. It's time we protect the paychecks of New Mexico workers. It's common sense, and it is long overdue.
Dan, simple question. Do you think it's going to pass this session?
Well,
will it make it to the governor's desk?
It'll pass the House.
Okay.
I have no doubt about that. What's going to be interesting, kind of back to talking about some of the machinations, is, the Senate's up for election this next time. The governor has shown the ability to raise a ton of money. We do know that this issue brings in a lot of money from outside of the state for elections. I wouldn't want to be one of those 4 or 5 senators. I wouldn't want to be, someone like Senator Sapien from a fairly conservative, pro-business community that's wrong on this issue and wind up with an opponent that's going to have $700,000, $800,000 to run against you. So I think if that groundwork is laid correctly, I think that there's going to be a vote in the Senate, and I think that there's a real chance that it'll get to the governor's desk. People forget this bill has passed before. Bruce King vetoed a right-to-work bill when there was a coalition in the House, and I believe the Democrats ran the Senate at that time also. So the right to work has passed as a history in New Mexico. I think it'll pass this time. I think the governor's going to get it. But at the end of the day, we know less than 2% of the private sector is unions in this state. It's really a big chunk of government employees.
If I might jump in here, just as far as the mechanics of this thing goes, you need it's 25-17 Democrats over Republicans in the Senate. It's going to get through the House, and I would assume it'll get through the House very quickly. Then it'll end up in the Senate. So, so people are talking about, well, you need 4 Democrats to flip, and then if it's a tie, 21-21, the lieutenant governor would break the tie. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because it has to go through committee first. Now it'll probably die in committee, almost certainly. It'll probably be tabled in committee. Then what's going to happen is, quite possibly, I would bet that someone, Republican in the Senate side, will try to blast it. Now, you've had blasted bills a lot in the House.
Go ahead and give the folks shorthand for what blasted.
A blast means that when a bill is tabled, it's not dead. So once the bill is tabled, it can come back to the speakers, or I guess in the
majority
Senate,
leader.
Majority leaders. It could go back to the majority leader once any state senator brings it up. They can bring it up as a point of order. So now if you get a floor vote, now you would need 4 Democrats to flip. Now, I've already talked to Phil Griego, who told me on the record a couple of months ago he would not vote for right to work. So he'd be one kind of squishy, or someone would think would be a squishy Democrat.
Right.
But I had another a former state senator, a Democrat, tell me just a couple of weeks ago he thinks right to work, if it got put on the floor, will pass. So stay tuned.
Interestingly, following the State of the State address here live, Senator Mark Boitano was sitting in your very seat, Lana Atkinson, and he said he could see 4 Democratic votes on the Senate side to make this work. He could actually see this happening. Interestingly, my question to you, however, is with only 4% of our workforce unionized here, what is this really about at the end of the day? And follow up, if anybody wants to jump in on this too, what does this mean for Democrats? Is this the bugle call to rally around something for this session? What do you think on those terms?
I think this is an ideological issue,
Right.
and it's a really a partisan issue, and it's put up there to create and divide, and it's not an important issue for New Mexico. There's hardly any unions. It doesn't matter really to the state. So this is a very symbolic issue where people are standing up and saying something about what they think is important. You know, what does it mean? I don't think that this, I mean, certainly the Democrats are rallying around this issue. I think there are other issues that are perhaps equally important, the voter ID issue, something they can rally around. There might be some others out there. So this isn't the only one, but this is a big one that ideologically has split the parties for a long time. So it's sort of a line in the sand.
Same question about unions and the effect on unions here. Unions have been doing their thing here, certainly politically, but is this the thing to get them going?
I think it's important to note, and this is something that sort of gets left out a lot of the discussion about what is called right to work. In New Mexico, you're typically not kept out of a job because you're not already a union member. And if you go to work somewhere where there is a union, the union is in fact required to negotiate on your behalf, even if you are not a dues-paying member. And so the impact on the, this characterizes, people need the choice to not be represented. That's really not where this is about. This is about defunding the unions in New Mexico. This is about taking money out of their coffers so that they will be less effective. And I think as well, and I was really struck during this speech about this, I think this is also the governor speaking to a national audience. This speech and this topic, I think in particular, is about showing that she can pull right to work through a traditionally Democratic state. It's a big, as we've said, ideological issue, and I think that it would be a big win for her on the national scene if she got it through.
I'll just jump in for one real quick thing. I've heard the argument, and it makes some sense, that this wouldn't have that much an effect. But I think doing some little political jujitsu, I think Republicans are going to come around and say, well, even if it just has an ancillary effect, our economy is struggling, let's pass it.
Well, it's got more impact than people think because it does have to do with big construction jobs. There are jobs that are being done by union shops that you're not allowed to work on if you're not a union guy. If you don't go through the union, you can't get hired by some companies. There's been a lot of push in the last couple of years where the unions have been protesting construction jobs that they've given to non-union people. It does have a bigger impact than I think people want to play. I'm not sure that this is, I'm going to disagree with Sophie on the national deal for Governor Martinez. I would tell you from what I've heard, she's clearly in favor of it. This wasn't her idea. This was, there's some legislators that brought this in and said, we want to do this. She sees the merits in it. So obviously I don't think she's going to miss the opportunity to take that. But I think this has a bigger impact in New Mexico, especially with the ranking workforce than people think it does. And I think you're going to see a real opportunity. I think you're going to be surprised at some of the people that show up to speak in favor of right to work as this bill passes through the legislature.
Let's see what happens. There's more to talk about in the governor's speech. We'll be right back to talk about reforms in the Children, Youth, and Families Department and restoring faith in government.